Prostituted women and girls constitute some of the most marginalized, violated, yet forgotten groups in society. It is clear that the system of prostitution entails severe human rights violations, including physical, psychological, and economic violence. It results in grave human rights violations such as torture, inhumane and degrading treatment, and infringes upon the right to safety, dignity, privacy, health, freedom of movement, and the right to family. I advocate for an abolitionist legal framework. States should decriminalize prostitution for women and girls, treat them as victims of a cruel system of exploitation and abuse, and provide comprehensive support and exit pathways. Simultaneously, they must criminalize the purchase of sexual acts and take stringent actions against pimping.
The African Group is deeply committed to addressing sexual exploitation and violence against women and girls in all its forms.
Albania,
Angola, Bangladesh,
Colombia, Cyprus,
Ethiopia,
La France, India, Lebanon, the Maldives,
Nigeria, Nordic Baltic countries,
Paraguay, Qatar, the Republic of Korea, Romania,
Sierra Leone,
Slovenia.
Prostitution results in egregious violations of human rights and multiple forms of violence against women and girls, who, as a result, are often dehumanized and perceived as persons without human rights.
La France est convaincue que la prostitution engendre la violence. Violence directe pour celles qui en sont les victimes, en très grande majorité des femmes, exposées à de nombreuses formes de traite des êtres humains et d'exploitation sexuelle. Violence indirecte aussi pour toutes les femmes.
Women in prostitution risk facing multiple forms of violence from clients, procurers and traffickers, often coupled with many intersecting forms of discrimination and inequalities.
Ma délégation considère la prostitution comme un système de violence qui réduit les femmes et les filles à des objets portant ainsi atteinte à leur dignité, à leur droit à la vie privée et affectant négativement leur capacité à atteindre l'égalité.
Prostitution reduces people, typically women and girls, to mere objects to be sexually violated, and it normalizes the commodification of human persons.
Le Burkina Faso partage l'analyse de la rapporteure spéciale selon laquelle la prostitution est assimilable à un système de violence qui réduit les femmes et les filles à l'état de marchandises perçues comme des personnes dépourvues de droits humains.
Of particular concern is how the system of prostitution sexualizes and racializes poverty.
La utilización de niñas en el ejercicio de la prostitución debe ser condenada por todos los estados como una práctica racista y clasista que utiliza los cuerpos de niñas vulnerables como mercancía, especialmente en países del sur global como Colombia.
نتفق مع ما جاء في التقرير مواضيع من وصف للبغاء كمظهر من مظاهر استغلال المرأة، كما نتفق مع الإشارة إلى العلاقة بين جريمة الإتجار بالبشر والبغاء، ونتفق أيضا مع الملاحظات المتعلقة بدور التكنولوجيا في تسهيل هذا النوع من الأنشطة التي يروح ضحيتها أشخاص من الفئات الأضعف في المجتمعات مثل النساء والأطفال والفتيات في البيئات الهامشية والفقيرة.
We align with the findings that prostitution exposes women and girls to greater risk of violence and exploitation, and share a deep concern about trafficking, prostitution, and the normalization of violence against women and girls in this context.
In Slovenia, around 90% of women engaged in prostitution come from abroad. In most cases, they are economically disadvantaged, indebted, and dependent on various substances or face other specific circumstances.
None of us in this room would willingly accept such a reality for ourselves, our daughters, our mothers, our sisters.
Unemployment and poverty can drive many women into prostitution, and these women are particularly vulnerable.
We can protect their dignity and rights by expanding economic opportunities and fostering empowerment.
The social stigma that is often attached to them adversely affects their full enjoyment of all human rights.
I have come to the conclusion that prostitution cannot be described as work. No work involves a customer performing acts inside of an employee's body.
ويأسف وفد بلادي لمحاولة بعض الأطراف شرعنة وظيفة الدعارة بدلاً من التركيز على محاسبة الجناة الذين يتعاملون مع المرأة كسلعة. ويرى أن مصطلح المشتغلة بالجنس أو sex worker هو مهين لأي امرأة ولا يجب قبوله بأي حال، كما أنه لا يعكس قدر الأذى الذي تتعرض له المرأة التي تضطر للعمل في تلك البيئة. إن تطبيع الدعارة يعد إحدى العراقيل أمام تحقيق المساواة بين الرجال والنساء.
Most of the victims, survivors of prostitutions and organizations reject the term sex work because they feel it gaslights them. It trivializes the violence and human rights violations that they have been subjected to. Women and girls are prostituted by the system and by others. They don't prostitute themselves.
Le thème qui nous réunit en ce jour demeure l'objet d'une grande préoccupation à l'échelle mondiale lorsqu'on constate que depuis des décennies, les rapports hommes-femmes sont régis par une relation de pouvoir très inégale.
The situations of vulnerability and abuse all persons practicing prostitution are often experiencing need to be identified and addressed through all appropriate measures.
We believe that the Special Rapporteur's recommendations provide a strong foundation for tackling prostitution with a new sense of responsibility.
We support the adoption of the abolitionist legal framework and its 5 pillars.
كما اطلعت المجموعة العربية بقلق على ما تضمنه التقرير. السيد الرئيس تعترف المجموعة العربية بدورة المرأة الأساسية في المجتمع وبحقها بحياة كريمة وأمينة وخالية من العنف ومن جميع أنواع التمييز، وعليه تدعم المجموعة التوصيات الواردة في تقرير المقررة الخاصة.
We welcome the recommendations and echo the Special Rapporteur's call for states to adopt the abolitionist legal framework.
Anti-trafficking policies that create an artificial distinction between forced and free prostitution should not be misused. We know that in a number of countries, organizations advocating for criminalizing buying and pimping are kept out of policy discussions. They are vilified, attacked, denied access and funding, and that has to stop. In designing, implementing, and evaluating policies, you involve the full spectrum of women in prostitution, irrespective of their position. Not some of them, not those with contact with powerful lobbies. It's high time that we recognize prostitution for what it truly is: a system of violence, exploitation, and abuse. Action must be comprehensive and it must be bold. It must be victim-centered and it must be sex and gender responsive. It must be taken and led by states who continue to have the primary responsibility to protect and assist victims.